Ooh. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for being up so early on Thursday. Not as early as me. Sorry, Pete. Missed your talk. So my name is Jessica. I am a senior principal architect at NewDay, a company in the UK that does cards and credit. All very interesting, I'm sure. I won't be talking about that today, though. I am also an MVP, as are most people who are speaking here. It's not really a claim to fame anymore, is it? Everybody's an MVP, really. And I'm currently on the board of the .NET Foundation. My term ends at the end of the month, and if you're interested in anything to do with the .NET Foundation, come speak to me. I will be around the conference for the next 2 days, and happy to have a chat about that. So today, we're going to talk about stabilizing eccentric systems. In my career, I've worked with a variety of different systems in a variety of different companies. Big, small, startup, up to government, to Experian. I've worked in various sizes. There's one thing that a lot of these systems have had in common, which is they're normally the systems that nobody else wants to touch. So I get hired to come in, understand them, understand the teams that are working on them, and see if we can help stabilize and make them into systems that people actually enjoy working on and know the purpose of. So today I want to talk through some of the things I've learned doing this work, and give you some of the secret sauce, the secret tips into what I find helps with these kind of projects. The little trick here is this isn't a very technical talk, so surprise, you've actually come to a talk that's a lot about people and about communication, so sorry about that. There is a little bit of text splattered throughout, but if you're not a Devi engineer who's got like 15 years experience, don't worry, none of my slides are going to scare you. So there's 5 things we're going to talk through. We're going to talk through understanding, measurement, prioritization, communication, and making mistakes. These things can be done in order, or they can be done at the same time. We'll talk through some examples as we go through it. But first of all, understanding. So I like to use this term preloved, and I'll explain why. So we talk a lot about legacy systems. And legacy, like the root of the word originally was you left a legacy. It was something good. It was something that you were proud of. But it's turned into this dirty word in tech. Nobody wants to work on a legacy. It's always the system that's been left in the cupboard that nobody wants to talk about. It's always a system that is probably a bit old, written in a language nobody likes. So instead, I like to use the term preloved, because at some point, there was a team of people, or maybe a couple of people, who worked on this system. They got asked to solve a problem, and they did the best they could, given time constraints, given the technology that they had at the time. Like, there's reasons that the system is the way it is. So for a degree of empathy, I like to use the word preloved, because somebody loved it once, and maybe we can help the teams love it again. And language is very important. So, as I say, I've changed my terminology, and my teams luckily have kind of picked it up. But language is incredibly important, not only for understanding the systems itself, but also for understanding each other. An arbitrary example of this, pants. So in the UK, pants is underwear. In the US, pants is trousers. So the term no pants, no service suddenly takes a whole different meaning, and you wonder what they're checking. Now, this is a very simple example in English, and let's face it, English is not the easiest language. We make it as hard as possible. But then you have technology, where we have our special little words, our jargon, and anything that has 2 Ds is good, right? DDD, TDD, BDD. So we've got all these acronyms as well. And these letters mean something to our developers, but sometimes they mean completely different things for the same 3 letters. And that's not even counting in when you're talking to a product person or someone's working in finance. Like, what are we even talking about? The one that comes up a lot in the teams I work in, integration test. Oh, whenever somebody asks me about an integration test, my soul escapes my body. I'm like, what are we talking about? So I'm sure you've all got similar experiences where we need a shared language. And that's the case for these systems as well. And kind of going on to this, the first big step that I would take is understanding the domains. Now, you're all at NDC, so I imagine that you have an understanding of the word domain. I now wonder if you turn to the person next to you if they had exactly the same definition. So what I like to do is talk about the product instead. Because you're not always going to be talking to people who are technical. You're not always going to be talking to someone who has the same understanding as domain as you. And this has happened in my most recent piece of work. Oh, domain, it's another one of those words. It's causing so much confusion. So instead, we talk about product. And the reason for this is not just so we understand what we're talking about, but at the end of the day, all the work that we do comes back to supporting a product. It means that we can talk to the many different departments within the company, have that shared understanding, but also the developers, the engineers, your infrastructure engineers, anyone who's working on these systems understands what they're working towards and why. It should always come back to product. Now, a mistake that I have made in the past, and I'm human, I'll probably do it again, is when I've been given a number of components, services, APIs, databases, and gone, what does this do? Oh, thanks, great. That's a great ask. I tend to take this the wrong direction. So for an analogy, a jigsaw puzzle. You've picked up a jigsaw puzzle from a charity shop, or you've got it secondhand, maybe a boot fair, and you start to put this jigsaw puzzle together. Now, you don't know if all the pieces are the part of the same jigsaw puzzle. You might have several different ones in this box. You don't know if there's pieces that are missing. You could take a piece and kind of jam it in and hope for the best, but you don't really know how this is all supposed to fit together. I've done this with systems before. I've looked straight into the code and gone, right, so this bit kind of looked like it goes here, and maybe, oh, but that's deployed over. No, it takes far too long. What you need to do is have the picture of the puzzle. The picture that's normally on the front of the box, if we're going for this analogy. But what does that mean in terms of understanding our systems and our product? How do we get this picture? I'm sorry, you've got to talk to people. I don't like it either. It's fine. So we talk to our users and stakeholders, and these come in many forms. You have your product owner, product manager. This is hopefully you've got someone who's worked on these systems before, has some pre-existing knowledge. You might not be that lucky. I've certainly had that case. If you can, talk to the users. Watch your users, see how they're using the system. You have your stakeholders. And I'll go through some of the things that these people will be interested in, but your stakeholders are going to have business interests in particular in your product. And again, if possible, your contact points. So sales and call center. It might be a product that you're selling to other people. And in that case, you want to know what's being sold because you want to know that this system can support what's being sold. As I imagine most of us have had some interesting experiences with sales, selling something that we don't even support. And then you have your call center, who'll have an idea of what are the common complaints, how this thing's being interacted with. It might even be a product that your call center's using. Again, I've had a past experience of working on a system that a call center has used, and the amount of things that I thought were bugs that were actually features for them, whoops. I learned that the hard way and just listened to the screams from the floor above as they did a release. So you'll be talking to them about key performance indicators. So what is it that they see as their successful metrics? So what are they looking at? Is it cost? Is it the amount of people who can use the system at once? There's a number of metrics for this. It's not a talk on KPIs, so I won't go into too much depth. How is the system being used? As I say, you might be surprised. And common issues that might come up. So there are some handy techniques. I'm not going to go into very much depth because these are entire talks by themselves, But I will share some resources at the end for if you want to learn some more information. So event storming and capability mapping are the two kind of DDD special words I'm going to say this time around. And the reason I use them, so capability mapping is to help identify those domains, those product areas, the bounded context, the business capabilities, so what this product is doing, and that will help you with your language. And event storming is understanding the connections and flows that happen both in the system, online and offline. There will be, well, there's likely to be some manual elements that you wouldn't necessarily see when you're putting that jigsaw puzzle together of all the different technical components. So the hidden pieces. So this brings me to measurement. Sorry, I'm pausing because I'm quite nervous and I'm trying not to speak like I'm a chipmunk. So your measurement, the most important thing is how do you know it's working? There's 5 things I'm going to talk through here. Again, from experience, I've done this both, sadly, as an individual contributor, sitting by myself at a desk, and sometimes with a team, which is even better. So first of all, I want to talk through documentation. Oh, if you're really lucky, there'll be some good documentation, but I would put money on the fact that this is probably going to be one of the worst suffering areas. Whether your company uses GitHub, Confluence, or something else, whether it has hidden Google Docs around where you have to find somebody who left the company 5 years ago and how to access their account. Oh, I see some nods. I'm glad I'm not the only one. This is one of the most painful of the 5 points. I'm not going to lie to you. But if you can find runbooks, readmes, project notes, release notes, hidden notes in someone's desk where they're cursing the system with some sort of witchy hex, don't blame them. We're trying to get as much information as you can. The big warning sign with documentation, pretty much guarantee it's going to be out of date, it's going to be hard to understand, it's going to have missing information. So good luck if you just do this step. I wouldn't suggest it. You have your tests. Do they run? Hopefully. Do they run consistently? Maybe. And what's the quality of them? Now, this isn't a testing talk. I'm not going to get contentious with you here and tell you how to judge the quality of your tests. But if you're lucky, your tests will also help with the documentation part. You'll be able to read the tests and go, OK, so this thing does this thing. It aligns to documentation. I'm a big fan of a given when then. I'm sorry. But yeah, so you want to have a little look through to see if assert is equaling true, or if it's just doing nothing and they've done something to make those little ticks turn green. Done it myself. You want to have a look at the type of test. Oh, sorry, my husband's shaking his head at me. I'm being shamed from the front row during my talk. I should be ashamed. So there's also the type of test. So is it just unit tests? Do they have integration tests? Do they have tests which are checking the integration boundaries? Do they have smoke tests? Are they automated or are they manual? Again, it's going to link into your documentation if you're lucky. If you're unlucky, it's going to be somebody that you're going to have to hunt down in an office somewhere to go, what are you doing? Can I watch? And see how they're testing something. So are they automated? Are they manual? If they are manual, do they need to be documented so they can be automated? And then the processes. So when are they run? Are they run against pull requests? Are they run against deployments? Are they run whenever somebody feels like it? Are they run at all? Let's quickly skip past that question. And my clicker just decided to stop working. Sorry about that. So I'm going to skip to pipelines and processes, because it's slightly linked to what we just talked about. So again, pipelines and processes, do they run? When were they last run? I've done this talk once before, and I got asked about the worst case scenario. I have worked on a system where the deployment pipeline hadn't been run for 4 years. So the team was so nervous about the fact that if they had deployed this, it was going to break, and they didn't know the consequences. They've been pushing changes but they just never deployed them. It's kind of beautiful. And they got away with this for 4 years. So what we did is we had a look at the deployment pipeline. We went, yep, let's give this a go, and everything broke. Luckily, we had kind of figured out how to roll it back nicely. Not all that nicely. Did take a bit longer than expected. But yeah, there are scenarios where they might not have been run in a while. 4 years is my worst case. I have also seen 2 years with the same scenario, so this is more common than you think it is. If you don't think it's happening in your company, maybe double check. What's covered in a CI pipeline? So what tooling is used? Are your tests being run? Do you have a linter? Is the security testing, etc.? Is the deployment fully automated? Kind of like a little side note to this, not only is it fully automated, but is it in like a coherent one language script or one tool? Again, not uncommon to kind of see this Frankenstein deployment pipeline, which can cause teams a lot of pain. But yes, I've worked in technology long enough that I've had to do manual deployments as well. And again, when and how are the pipelines run? So are they run against a PR? Are they only run against deployments? If they're only run for a production deployment, I wish you luck. But yeah, these are kind of the things that I would look at. Observability. I have done talks on observability. I am very passionate about the topic, but this is not an observability talk, so I'll try and stay in my box. Observability, the main 3 things I'd look at are logs, alerts, and metrics. Logs, the level of your alerts, the level of your logs. So again, semi-recently, I had a team that was putting all of its trace information into the production environment. It was very costly. It wasn't very useful to use because the amount of noise that was happening. So when they had to go and investigate something, they had to read through a lot of logs to find out what was actually useful to them. Also kind of the quality of logs, so whether they're structured or not. One of the first systems I worked on, they logged every single time something entered a method and exited a method. Again, that's a lot of logs. So just light little touches like that. Alerting. Alerts are incredibly important, especially when it comes to noise. So if you're in a hospital, for example, you'll hear lots of different types of beeps. The reason is that those beeps mean a very specific thing to the nurses. One of them is this person's about to die. The other one is they've just got really handy on the buzzer and they're going to annoy you for the next hour, so you might want to silence it. It's the same with our tech systems. You want to make sure that the alerts are somewhere that they can be seen and have being paid attention to, but you also don't want alerts going off every 3 seconds because that channel's going to be muted. So have a look at how much noise is being produced from your alerts and whether there might be missing ones as well. Metrics, I do metrics, but how are they used is very important in this. Vanity metrics are a thing, which are metrics which aren't useful. They're just somebody wanted them, so they got put in. A metric that you need is something like, there's a lot of resources around RED for APIs. So your rate, your error, and your duration gives you an idea of your API health. Those are really useful metrics. Again, noise. If you have a lot of dashboards and a lot of metrics, how do you know what's useful to you? And this one I'm going to go into a little bit more depth, which is recent incidents. Now, as I mentioned, my lovely Preloved systems were loved ones. But they've probably been neglected for a while, so they're probably complaining on a regular basis. And as such, you will have a lot of incidents that happen. So there's 3 kind of main slides to this. First of all, I look at the current process for incident response, meet the teams that are involved, understand how they're engaged with engineering. So you might have a separate incident management team, or incident management might be dealt with your engineering teams. Different companies, different formats. But understand how engineering are engaged with those teams. Understand the end-to-end process of incident management. So from when a thing happens to when it gets noticed, right the way through to being resolved. With this, if you're lucky, there'll be some measurements. So if you are very lucky, there'll be the mean time to detect from a thing happening in your system, how long does it take for someone to notice? There'll be a time to respond. So somebody has noticed the thing has happened. How long does it take for them to do something about it? And the time to resolve, how long does it take to fix the thing and stop it from happening again? Who has visibility of the incidents? So again, it might be an incident team, which means your engineering team has no idea that your system's collapsing every few seconds. It's just causing someone else some pain. And how are the measurements used? So are they tracked? Do you have some company objectives around making sure that your time to resolve these incidents is shorter than it is? Is there somebody in C-suite who's actually really angry about the amount of time that your system is going down and nobody's doing anything about it? But nobody knows because they don't know that they're supposed to be measuring this. And then there's some things that often occur in incidents, so post-mortems, root cause analysis, and preventative actions. Post-mortems, in terms of my definition, is your log of what's happened and when. It's normally a paper document, a Google Doc or Word doc, which has a log of the main events that's happened during the incident. This can be used for a root cause analysis. What it says on the tin, you're trying to determine what was the root cause that made this event happen. There's lots of exercise around this. 5 whys, fishbone, again, there's lots of more in-depth talks about this. Happy to share resources afterwards. But you need to get down into what caused this and what actions can be taken to stop it from happening again, or even to shorten that resolution time. Which brings me to preventative actions. Are they recorded? Are they planned and tracked? Are they prioritized? Are they recorded? Yeah, quite possibly. Are they planned? Maybe. Are they prioritized? Never, really. Let's be honest. It doesn't really happen. But they should be, and we know why, or we will do by the end of this talk, if I do my job properly. This slide, the next bit, it used to have a less talk-friendly title, which is how I refer to it at work, which is, I make them create the poop list. I don't always use that language. So what I like to do is get the teams that have worked with these systems, and I'm not just talking about developers, it might be the people who support the infrastructure, etc. Anyone who's had interaction with the systems that you're dealing with, get them either onto a room or online with a bunch of Post-its and go, tell me what you really like about system and tell me what you really hate or that you really want to be working on, like where is this system causing you pain? Should be a safe environment, people can put what they want. It's fun to make a bit of a joke of it, but this is where you get some really valuable information for planning the work to deal with these systems. And once they've done all these Post-its, this is my secret piece of work, is I like to put them into certain categories. Now, I will go into more depth why these particular categories, but I'll get those Post-its, I'll sit by myself and put them into security and compliance, commercial and feature, maturity and debt, the architectural pillars, because I am an architect and I have to think about them occasionally, business KPIs, housekeeping, and other. I will go through what these mean in a moment. So for an example, I've got a notifications product. After talking to my stakeholders and my product owner, I kind of know what this product's doing. And I've had my team in a room, and they've said, oh, there's personal data in logs, and there's an out-of-date framework. I'll pop that into security. We would like some new features that aren't supported yet. Yep. Maturity and debt, our tests are a bit slow. They're a bit flaky. And one of your engineers wants to rename a widely used library because sometimes that happens. Go through the architectural pillars. I won't teach my grand to suck eggs here, you probably already know, but your cost, your reliability, your resilience, etc. Is the business KPIs, so cost effectiveness is one that we have identified in this particular exercise. And then housekeeping, so this is often related to how they're managing their Scrum ceremonies or how they're organizing themselves. So in this case, they've noticed that they get blocked when they're going into test and estimates aren't really working for the team. And my other is somebody saying that they don't really get to socialize with their teammates. And So it's not necessarily to do with the tech, always. Sometimes it's to do with the team itself and how they're working. All of this will help us with prioritization, I promise. So with these items of work, you'll want to do a value analysis. The 3 things that I look at are urgency, impact, and effort. So is there a committed deadline? Can we negotiate that deadline? Is it impacts in terms of risk, legislation? So is there some sort of law or governance or compliance reason why you might have impact for not doing this work? The user experience and the business requirements. You'll see there's a lot of threads that have repeated themselves throughout this. And then effort. So how complex is the work and how many dependencies are there to manage? The third one is one that I see gets missed a lot in these conversations. But again, I'll go into why it's important. Some of you may have seen something like this before, but these then get used to put into a do, a plan, a backlog, and eliminate. So do is something that's going to happen in the next couple of sprints, plan next couple of quarters, backlog eventually, and eliminate, you don't really need to do it. And in terms of this, you're looking at your value analysis, so high impact, high urgency, and high impact, low effort. If somebody's really yelling about it, and it needs to be done yesterday, or it doesn't take much to do, just do it. If it's high impact, but you can negotiate that urgency, you can plan it in. And then everything else goes into the backlog, apart from anything that's low impact, not urgent, or high effort. Which brings me back to, oh, no, I have got ahead of myself. It will bring me back to my example. So going back to those categories I was talking about earlier, and how they relate to these values. Security and compliance, they're normally high urgency, they've normally got a deadline associated with them. You normally have an idea of the impact, so whether that's a penalty because you aren't PCI compliant and you're about to get caught out. And the effort can be variable. Commercial, normally you can negotiate the urgency, depends how much your product owner likes you. The impact can be variable, so can the effort. Maturity and debt, most of this is variable, but the urgency tends to be quite a bit lower. But as I say, I won't talk through all of these because you'll be bored out of your minds, but each of these areas has an associated impact and value, which is why I like to group those post-it notes to make my life a little bit easier. The housekeeping and other tends not to be planned work, but it's normally something that you want to pick up with the teams relatively urgently to make sure that they're happy. And this is where my example came in. So I've taken those post-it notes. They've been in those categories, so I've got a relatively good idea of what their value analysis is. I've put them into my quadrants. And in this case, the wanted to rename a widely consumed library. Oh, that's much too high effort. It's going to cause everybody pain. And this team already has some issues with the company not really trusting them or liking them, so let's not make some enemies where we don't need to. And I've also added in my post-its from my previous analysis. So I've looked through that documentation and the tests and the incident management. So there's been some work identified from those exercises as well. And I've talked through with the team and product on what this means compared to everything else that we've already discussed. So they have an idea on why it's being prioritized in that way. Now, this work can be considered as 2 separate categories. There is reactive, expecting the unexpected, and proactive, planning ahead. Now, catchy titles aside, the reason why I want to talk to you about this is because if you've got an unstable, not well understood system, your reactive work is likely going to be very high. You're going to have a lot of incidents coming through. You're going to have teams going, "You are blocking us, rah. We were supposed to tell you this 3 weeks ago, but we've just decided to land it on you now." And not very much proactive work. So your poor product owner will be trying to plan in the work, and it just gets blown out the water by all of this very urgent stuff that's coming in. Now, as you go through the items of work that I've talked about, what should happen is your reactive work should get lower. So as you have prioritized those actions from that incident response work, actually prioritize them, oh, exciting. That reactive work should come down because your incident should go down, which means you can plan more, which means you have a solid velocity, which means the business is happy. Yay! And you can measure this through whatever tool that you're using to plan your work with, most likely Jira. You can actually show these percentages changing and your team becoming more stable, which is a great thing to communicate. See what I did there? So communication, step number 4. Consider your audience. So you'll have your stakeholders, both internal and external. Impacted teams, so these are people who are doing the work or are impacted directly by the work. Dependencies, the teams that may have to plan in some work to help you out. Senior leadership, so C-suite and exco, they will be very happy that you suddenly understand the product that you're working with. And the peers, so these are teams that aren't directly impacted by your work, but can learn from it, might be interested in it. Hey, you might be able to poach a couple of them across into the dark side to work on the interesting system, who knows. But it's good to share knowledge. And it's important to consider what they care about, especially in terms of communication. So your stakeholders care about the measures of progress and success. Can that team now reliably work on things? Are they actually going to get features through? Are you not going to get complaints about outages all the time? Impacted teams want to know about what the work is and the impact and the progress of it. Hopefully you've been using that shared language, so you're all talking about the impact on the product. If you're not, that's fine, but hopefully you are. Dependencies will want to know how it impacts them and how they can plan the work. Senior leadership want to know, as I said, about the progress, success, and delivery impacts. So not only of your team, but also anything else that's affected. And the peers want to know about what they can use. Have you got a tasty little shared library? Have you learned something that can help them and save them time going forward? And with this, it's very, very important to show your workings. So show not only the results, but how you got there. You want to talk about what work was planned, why you prioritized this work, how you're going to achieve the plans, when do you expect to see a measurable impact? And this is all going back to our metrics and everything else we've previously talked about. How can people get updates of the work? Different people will consume information in different ways. So it might be that you have a weekly meeting to update people. It might be that you also have a newsletter that goes out once a month. Because these stakeholders, because these audiences need different levels of information, probably best not to have a 100-person meeting with everybody sitting on there that only need to have like 10 minutes worth of it. It's expensive, people won't be engaged. So make sure that the way that they can get updates about the work fits them and suits them. And plan B, if it doesn't go as expected, maybe plan C and D as well. We'll get into that in a little bit more. And now, prioritizing when everything urgent is really difficult. But you now know the impacts of your work, you know like how to prioritize this with a product, you know how to support the product and why you have to deal with making sure this incident never happens again, opposed to doing this feature that might bring the company some money, going back to those KPIs. I am not taking away from the fact that this is a really difficult conversation to have. It's not fun. I don't enjoy doing it. But the most important thing is to know when to let items burn. Not out of badness, a little bit out of badness. So what I mean by this is you now have enough information, not to go, no, we're not doing that, but we can't do that right now because we have these other items of work that we are doing, and the reason that these items of work are more important is because this is the impact of them compared to what you're doing. So as long as you're explaining to people why their really, really important thing that they really want to do isn't being done, and that it will be done eventually, but this is the reason why not now. That's an easier conversation to have than no. I'm about to say, my boss isn't in the audience. No, he won't watch the recording, it's fine. So the other trick with this is sometimes you will get a lot of pushback on, but I really need this, but I really need this. Or maybe your team really cares about an item of work because it causes them a lot of pain, but it's not visible to your external users. What if that item of work just doesn't happen? So that pain then affects those users, those stakeholders, and suddenly the stakeholders really care about it. Now, I'm not advocating for always letting situations get worse. I'm definitely not advocating for that. But sometimes there are situations where if you let a little simmer turn into a visible fire, it will help you get that work prioritized as it needs to be. Sorry, David Whitney. And I've said this, but keeping it visible is keeping it safe. So as long as you're visible about the work that you're doing, why you're doing it, what the state of your system is, where your successes are, you are keeping your project and your team safe. Now, a lot of these systems that I've worked with, there is lost trust in the teams that are supporting these systems. Because externally, people don't have the information to know why it keeps breaking or why this system is so unloved. And then they lose trust in the engineers because often there's a message going, oh yeah, we'll have that product out by next week. But then 50 incidents have come in. They can't do that. And all of a sudden, all the stakeholders are seeing is that they're not getting what they asked for. Nothing more than that. So often there's a loss of trust. In order to build up that trust, you need to show your workings. You need to show why you're tackling a piece of work. But also, you can be relatively vulnerable and show the impacts of the situation the team's in and how it's affecting them. So being visible about this work is keeping it safe and will help you going forward. Which brings me to making mistakes. I can't guarantee a 100% reliable system. I can't guarantee that I am going to make the company lots and lots of money. I can guarantee mistakes are going to be made. Probably not the message they want to hear, but they are going to happen. And very importantly, you can't fix the world with this. So I've gone through a lot of content very quickly. And the feeling that I see a lot from my lead engineers, and I often have myself, is I see all of the problems, and it's a lot, right? Like, you know that you need to fix the alerting, the logging, the metrics, that the system keeps falling apart every time you deploy it. You have to do all these pipelines. Like, this is a lot of work we're talking about. And sometimes it feels like too much. So it's important to acknowledge that you can't fix everything at once, and being able to scope down what you can control in what time frame will help you a lot. It will help your teams a lot. It's a conversation I have very frequently with the teams that I work with, getting them to rescope back down to what they can control and acknowledge when they've had a success with it. And this is what I mean by you can help others as well as yourself. So there's a really beautiful book called Endings. It's not really a technical book, but it's a short read. It's very nice. And it goes through how human nature, we don't really look at, we always look at what's coming next. It's always a treadmill. So we don't take the time to stop and go, what can we learn from this? What have we achieved from this? Instead, it's, okay, so we've achieved that epic. What's the next one? We've fixed the alerts. What's the next bit? We've made our things. We've saved a bunch of money. What can we do now? The problem is with that is everybody gets burnt out. You're always in the depth of the fire. You're feeling the heat of it. You feel the problems that are around you, but you don't actually get to say, hang on, we actually have saved this amount of money, or we actually got, like, Pete could take a holiday this week, and it was okay because he's not the only person who knows how to manually deploy the pipeline and do the tests. And, you know, he's not insisting that everybody has to go through him for PR before it can go to live. Sorry, Pete. You know it's true. But, you know, you can help others as well as yourself by taking, acknowledging those successes, those challenges, those learnings, and chunking this work into endings. This is what I meant at the beginning of my talk, where this is not a technical talk. Yes, it involves a lot of technical work. You have to have a good knowledge about testing or have people around you who do. You have to be able to talk to other people in a way that they understand. you have to be able to have the patience to go through all that documentation and realize when it's good and when it's bad. All of these are skills. Some of them are very technical. But this talk isn't a technical talk, because all of these elements that I've talked through today are actually the magic to building trust with the teams and with the company, which is the way that you'll then get support to do the work that you want to do going forward. It's how you build up a level of trust and respect in your role, which, by the way, is one of the hardest bits of being an architect. Nobody warned me about that. But yeah, as part of my role, I have to go into teams. Often I'm working with a number of teams at once. I mean, there are a number of reasons why if I went into a team, they'd go, why should we listen to her? And you build this trust with small experiments. It's a case of, look, I understand your pain. I've gone through this. This is my understanding of it all now. Let's just try this one thing. If it doesn't work, cool. We'll try something else. I want to hear your feedback on what's going on, but let's just try it. And as you do these small incremental experiments, you'll build that trust, because they'll see that it's not just some random lady who stands on a stage occasionally with her Comic Sans slides. There's a reason for that as well. And whitters on to people. But actually, there is some logic behind this. And then they can start proposing what the next small experiment is. And you can work together to build that trust. These small experiments you're going to be sharing with the rest of the company, so they understand why you're doing things, why it's important, and why they should care, which is that visibility part we talked about earlier. The measurable results, so all of that research that you did at the very beginning, you should be able to kind of get a view on what you can measure. Is it the velocity and the predictability of your team's delivery? Is it the amount of outages that you're having? Is it the uptime? There's a number of numbers that you can use here to demonstrate in a way that your different audiences can understand why you're doing this work, what comes out of it. Your work will become more predictable as you have less of those incidents coming through, less of the big reactive pieces of work, which makes everybody happy. It means that we can have our holidays and not worry too much. And improved experience. So going back to the very, very beginning. Sorry. This is why we're talking about product instead of domains. Because throughout all of this work, if you're talking about not the technology, not your API, not your system, but the product that they're impacting, not only will everybody understand why you're doing this work and what it's impacting, but also that improved experience comes in. So I am not an agile coach. I am not your lawyer. But user stories. I probably shouldn't talk about my current company, but I did have a team that I had as a CEO, I want this system to work so that the team's less stressed. Not really a user story. If we're talking about our product, suddenly that language is much easier to form with the team and create with each other. So you're talking about as a client person who is pressing this button, I need this thing to happen so that my credit details aren't spread across the internet. There's lots of different reasons, but being able to have that shared experience, shared language, being able to talk about the product consistently, being able to have those measurements at hand will improve not only experience for your users, but for your team, for your stakeholders. And it helps get that team that is not the favorite of the company to be one of the ones that everybody's looking at. Because, yeah, somebody over there might have a really fancy, stable product, but look at the progression that your team's made in comparison. If you can't tell, I really, really love these kind of projects. I don't know if that's a glutton for punishment, but yeah, I think they're great because not only is it working with very difficult technical systems, but I think the biggest part in technology, the most difficult part, most challenging part, is people. And often this is dealing with the people around the product as well. I did say I'd go through recommended resources. Ian Cooper is also wandering around the conference in the next few days. Lots of piercings, beardy, tattoos. It's hard to miss. There is only one Ian Cooper. But he does some really fantastic talks. I know he's famous for his test-driven development talk. If you haven't seen it, please do. It's really good. But he also has talks around capability mapping and event-driven collaboration, which will go into more depth about the capability mapping and event storming that I discussed earlier in a much more eloquent way than I could at the moment. The domain-driven design book, controversially, I like this book more than the big blue one. The big blue one I find is quite challenging to get through because it's very, very big, and I find it a bit intimidating. But that red one has most of the content you'll need, and it's very easy to consume. Probably a bit strange, the next two, but site reliability and DevOps. This will come in very, very handy for those initial slides where you're investigating into your system and how it's working and where the problems are. So the Site Reliability Engineering book has some fantastic chapters around incident management and has some resources that your company can use. Also has a couple of chapters around the metrics that may be important for your system, how to use them, what they mean, and what metrics to avoid, which, I owe many favors to the person who wrote that book. They saved me a lot of time and pain. And DevOps for Dummies. I know that you might not all be working in a DevOps environment. If we're being honest, most of us aren't. But being able to understand that different relationship between infrastructure and engineering, software engineering, for example, is quite important. But there's a lot of patterns in there that will help you with stabilizing the systems. So you don't need to be have a really solid knowledge on infrastructure to get benefit from that book. It also has a lot of really nerdy jokes relating to Lord of the Rings, and it's kind of a joy to read. So even if you don't think you'll benefit from it, it's a great book. I have run rather fast, as I say. Was a bit nervous. But I'd like to say thank you for coming to the talk, and I will happily take any questions for the next 10 minutes if you have them. Thank you kindly for your time. Oh, one thing, the Comic Sans thing. So I didn't do it just to all trigger you all, though that was a bit tempting. No, so Comic Sans is the most dyslexic-friendly font, I found out the other day there, which is why I used it. So Calibri and Comic Sans are the two main fonts that I use throughout these slides, and that's for anyone who might need it. But also it's fun because everybody hates Comic Sans, so I'm not sorry. So thank you very much. Any questions? Oh, yeah.
For the books you showed, it's more technical, but I'm more interested in your mental model. Because for me, if I summarize your presentation, it's more than a process.
Yeah.
So can you tell me how did you reach this or experience through building?
Cool. So is it these groups or the groups of people? Oh, the end-to-end process.
I mean, the best way is when you put the sticky notes, there is a slide of sticky notes.
Ah, yes. Oh dear, I can't navigate my own slides. Sorry about this. These ones, yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, is how these groupings are achieved and why these groupings, how I got there. Yeah? So this is a bit of an arbitrary example, but I will go through each of these sticky notes for you. So the high impact, high urgency, the personal data and logs, and out-of-date framework, those are relating to security asks. So personal data in logs is a big GDPR no-no. Very relevant in the UK at the minute. And the out-of-date framework, there's often policies and SLAs around not having out-of-support frameworks. So because they're security items, they will have an impact, so a penalty relating to them, that'll be quite clear. And often I find that the high urgency, there will be set SLAs, so service level agreements, expected dates. And again, those will be easy to get hold of. For the noisy alerts and some incident prevention item, you can tell where I got lazy with my notes. So again, I've put high impact, low effort because it's not a lot of effort to get rid of alerts often, unless you've done something really funky. And normally there are some small items with incident management where you can do some improvements. So it might even be putting in an alert for when something goes wrong, so you get that lower response time. For planning, tests are slow and flaky. So again, the urgency is negotiable. It's not overly urgent, but hopefully the effort isn't too high. Again, depends on the quality of tests. But it does have quite a high impact on the team. So this will give you an idea of how reliable it is to make that change, like how safe your change is. Log levels, again, high impact because it's going to decrease the amount of logs in production, for example, if you are logging everything. Not only in terms of being able to investigate incidents, but also sometimes in terms of cost. Sorry, Splunk, but very, very expensive if you're logging a lot. Pipeline improvements, again, well, high impact is quite obvious there. But nobody's going to be yelling apart from the teams, and the effort, hopefully, isn't too high, but sometimes it's a nightmare. And then you've probably got some other instant actions. For the backlog, so resilience and reliability issues, whenever it comes to the architectural pillars, it's not normally something that's you can plan overnight. So it's normally something that takes a bit of discovery, a little bit more effort into looking into. So you normally need to do some planning there. It will have quite high impact in terms of key performance indicators for the business. So often it's going to be relating to uptime and cost, etc. So there will be high impact. It will require some planning. But again, there's probably not some service level agreement or deadline that's associated. And that's the cost effectiveness as well. Incident process improvements. Changing processes is hard. I wish it wasn't. But yeah, changing processes always takes a bit of planning. But again, high impact. And batch not real time. That's actually an example from a past piece of work. So we needed to get alerts out to customers as soon as they were happening. So often fraud alerts was the case of this. But they were being done on a 48-hour batch. So it was 2 days before somebody realized there's fraudulent activity against their account. Not ideal. So it did have a high impact to the user, but it is going to take a bit of planning to sort that out because it's going to be a big system change. And then reaching monthly max notifications, that's another example from work. Blocked in test. Blocked in test is not a technical one, really. It's more of a process situation. So again, this often happens if you've got a throw it over the fence culture. So it might be that you're waiting for Pete to come back on holiday before he can test everything. So it might not be a technical fix, it might be a people change. So you're getting people to pair with a tester, or you're making the engineers more responsible for their testing, etc. So it might not be high impact to the company, it will be to the team. But no one's really going to be chasing you about the urgency of it because it's been like that for a long time, and the effort shouldn't be low. Well, depends on your team. Estimates not working, same situation, so that's very much for the team. And run books, I've put as not high impact, not urgent, low effort. Sometimes the effort for getting run books up to scratch is it's a bit higher effort than I want to admit, but we'll go with that. I made it up as I went along, if I'm being honest. But the eliminate, again, is actually an example I had from my work. And I don't blame the person at all, because he wanted to rename the library because it had a spelling mistake in it. And every time he saw it consumed everywhere else, it was driving him nuts. So I don't blame him, but it's going to impact a lot of teams. It's a big piece of work. Nobody really wants that to happen, so we just didn't do it. He got over it eventually, it was fine. Any other questions? Yeah.
The same slide. It's a general question, not regarding the post-it notes. Wouldn't you drop not high impact and not urgent?
Yep, so the question is, wouldn't we drop not high impact, not urgent also? Some may. So this is going back to my days as an engineer. I like to have little 1 or 2 pointers in a backlog for, you know, when you have those days where you've been working on something that's really, really difficult, it's kind of driving you nuts, and you just want a distraction for a couple of hours. I used to have back pocket stories, which is something that I knew I could solve in a couple of hours. It'd make me feel good about life again. And I like to have those in a backlog so I could turn around to my product owner going, in order for me to think through this issue, I need to solve something, feel good about myself, and then I'll continue, I promise. So those are the ones that I tend to just sneak in a backlog. It's not for everybody, but I find it helps my mental health. Any more for any more? Super. Well, I'll be around the conference for the next couple of days. Feel free to come up and have a chat. I hope that this was of some value, and if it wasn't of value, I hope it was entertaining. So thank you very much.